I'm not ashamed to hold my Lord, nor to defend his cause. Maintain the honors of his word, the glory of his cross.
We're in lesson number 3 on our exhortations on Messianic Prophecies. This is the 4th week, but we had the introduction, and so we're on lesson number 3. I said at the close of the last lesson that I disagreed with part of the lesson, not on the substance. Substance is not what I disagree on. I'm not going to argue that Jesus didn't come from the tribe of Judah, or that the tribe of Judah was not important in the messianic promises that God gave. What I am going to sort of put before you is that sometimes when we go back to Scripture, we have the benefit of hindsight. We can go and say, okay, Jesus was from the seed of woman, of the tribe of Abraham, of the family of Abraham, and of the house of David. And by necessary conclusion, if he was from the house of David, Jesus was from the tribe of Judah. Had to be. David was from the tribe of Judah. He wasn't from Levi. He wasn't from Simeon or Reuben or Ephraim or Manasseh. He was from Judah. But the problem when we know the end of the story is that sometimes we can go back and take a look at a promise and say, well, that looks an awful lot like a messianic promise. But the Scripture in the New Testament doesn't specify that it was. And we might draw a proper conclusion, but from the wrong verse. And so our lesson book is taking us to Genesis chapter 49. We will discuss Genesis 49 and what's going on here. And then we'll, after we discuss this a little bit, discuss why I sort of have a problem with this being a messianic promise. But then we'll conclude the class by showing, yes, indeed, Jesus was of the tribe of Judah, and that is important that we realize that. Genesis 49, verse 10. Naomi, you can get that.
The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, till tribute comes to him. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples.
Yeah, see, this is part of the reason why I have a little bit of an issue with Genesis 49, is because there was a word that's often in verse 10 that wasn't in Naomi's version, the English Standard Version. Does anyone know what that word is in verse 10? That a lot of people wonder what it's talking about. Scepter will not pass from Judah, nor a lawgiver between his feet. What's the next phrase in most Bibles? Until Shiloh comes. Now, Shiloh, people wonder, what does Shiloh mean? There was a city in Israel named Shiloh, and that was where the tabernacle was up until the days of Eli, when the Philistines took the Ark of the Covenant captive, and Shiloh was burned. And Shiloh ceased being where the tabernacle was. Tabernacle sort of wandered in the days of Saul and the days of David until the temple was built by Solomon. But for the first 400 years of Israel being in the promised land, or about 300, maybe 350 years, the tabernacle was in Shiloh. And people say, well, is this the Shiloh that's being talked about? I don't believe it is. But otherwise, the promise would have had no meaning after the tabernacle was established in Israel. And I don't think that's what's being talked about here. Naomi's version, the Standard Version, has tribute until tribute comes. This shows you that there is a little bit of confusion as to what Jacob is talking about here. What is going on in the chapter? What's going on? Okay. Now, when you want to talk about the most important blessings that we read of in Genesis, when it comes to the birth order of sons, who usually got the highest blessing? Firstborn son. Now, why didn't Reuben, who is the firstborn son, we know from the text, we don't have to speculate, why did Reuben not receive the highest blessing? That's verses 3 and 4. All right, so he's unstable as water, and he did something specifically. Yeah. I forget it was Bilhah or Zilpah. It's one of the two. One of the two concubines. He defiled his bed. That's what Jacob said. That is a euphemism in the Bible, for he slept with one of Jacob's wives. That's an abomination. Forget the fornication that goes along there. It was someone else's wife. And not only that, it was your father's wife. Read Leviticus, and that kind of a relationship will be banned under the law of Moses. Doesn't matter if she was your birth mother or not. If your father was married to the woman, you were not permitted to have that type of relationship with her. No matter if your father was alive or dead. Even in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, Paul chastised the Corinthians for accepting someone into their number who was engaged in that very same type of relationship, saying that the Gentiles don't even do that. So Reuben didn't get the firstborn. Who are the next two sons of Jacob? Because you would think, okay, Reuben didn't get it. Certainly, second son would get it. Who are the next two? Simeon and Levi. Now, why didn't they get it? One of them. Simeon would be older than Levi. Neither of them got this. Yeah, the city of Shechem. Because Shechem filed their sister Dinah. And Jacob did nothing about it. They took matters into their own hands and killed all the men of the city. And so that's what verses 5, 6, and 7 are talking about. So now we have the top 3 sons of Jacob not receiving the highest blessing. Then you come to Judah. Judah's number 4. So Judah is going to receive this part of the blessing. Now I will tell you, he doesn't receive the birthright that usually comes. Remember earlier on, Jacob not only took Esau's birthright, he took Esau's blessing. Those two were separate. Headship of the family. This is what Judah was getting. Leadership of the family. That's what Judah was getting. Joseph received the birthright. Because remember, he had 2 sons. Both of those 2 sons received land in Israel. That's what the birthright was. The birthright, the firstborn, got an extra portion of inheritance. If there were 2 children, the inheritance would be divided into 3, and the firstborn would get 2 parts. If there were 3 children, the birthright would be divided into 4, and the oldest would get 2 parts. If there were 12 children, the birthright would be divided into 13, and the firstborn would get 2 parts. Usually it was the firstborn. But in this case, Joseph received 2 parts. One for Ephraim, one for Manasseh. So Joseph received the birthright, not only for being of his favorite wife, Rachel, but I'm sure as sort of All right, your brothers put you here. You're going to get something for some of your suffering that you had to suffer for, and that's what you're going to get. But Judah received headship. He received the blessing. And so we have the fullest blessing coming upon Judah. And when you think of lions and scepters, what type of imagery does that induce? Like, as far as what type of position might come from Judah? Kings. You ever taken a look at what are they called? Pardon me? Well, it's heraldry and the coat of arms. That's what I was looking for. Of royalty. You'll often see lions depicted on there with scepters, symbols of power. Lion, kingly beast. Scepters is the symbol of power. And so what is being talked about here is kings would come from Judah. Now, this is just before Jacob died. And if we do some math, we're probably, if I remember my math right, we're probably 1770-something BC. It's going to be almost 700 years until Judah has a king come from it at all. If you know a little bit about the history of Israel from after Genesis, what tribe did Moses come from? Well, Aaron was his brother, so which tribe? Levi. Now, that's how you remember which one Moses came from. If Aaron's from Levi and Aaron's Moses' brother, he's from Levi. Which tribe did Joshua come from? That one's a little harder. One of Joseph's two sons. Got 50-50 chance. He came from Ephraim. Joshua came from Ephraim. And so when you think of the two great leaders after Jacob died, you got one from Levi and one from Ephraim. In fact, Saul, which tribe was he from? First king of Israel. He was from the tribe of Benjamin. It seemed, I can't remember. No, I could be wrong. You could point me out wrong. That's okay. I can't remember in the book of Judges if I knew of a judge that came from Judah. A lot of the judges came from the north. Gideon and Deborah and Barak, and most of the time the judges were judging the north. Samson wasn't, I don't think, no, Samson I can't think was Judah. He was down near there. No, he was from Dan. Samson was from the tribe of Dan. But, like as far as Judah itself, even though it had the most people, it did not exert a lot of the political power in the early history of Israel. Ephraim had the power. Ephraim had the tabernacle sitting within its borders, and a lot of the leaders came from the tribe of Ephraim. And if you understand that, then you understand a little bit of the kings, why Judah and Ephraim had this power struggle that eventually split the kingdom. Because Judah was where the kings came from, and Ephraim didn't like that. The tribe of Ephraim didn't like that, because they had always been the leaders, or at least among the leaders, and coming from Joseph's sons. But it would take almost 700 years until kings came from the tribe of Judah. And they continued coming from the tribe of Judah all the way through the Babylonian captivity. you always see, I've been learning this and seeing this all the way through the book of 2 Kings. A lot of time we dealt with Israel's kings, but we would have to talk about Judah's kings along the way. And there were a lot of righteous kings in the beginning that came from the house of Judah. We had Asa and Jehoshaphat and Joash and Amaziah and Azariah and Hezekiah. And after you got past Hezekiah, then you started having more strings of evil kings, with a break for Josiah near the end. But you had Manasseh, Hezekiah's son, Ammon, Manasseh's son. You had Jehoiakim, you had Joachim, and Zedekiah, and all of them were evil. With Josiah, after Hezekiah, there was one righteous king left. And that's it, one. And that would explain why Israel or Judah went into captivity with only one righteous king after Hezekiah. But all the way along, even when Israel was taken off into captivity, the writer of 2 Kings says God didn't forsake Judah because of the promise he made to David. Because of the promise he made to David. Because of the promise he made to David. And even when Israel was taken into captivity, or Judah was taken into captivity, the house of David was spared. You still had that lineage that wasn't lost all the way through the captivity. Matthew's genealogy contains names we don't know. After Jeconiah or Jehoiakim, there's only two names we know until you get to the New Testament. That's Zerubbabel and Shealtiel, because you read of them in Ezra and Nehemiah. But after Jehoiakim, the final king in the lineage of Jesus that came from the house of David, you didn't have any more kings from Judah. And yet Jesus did come from Judah. And the reason I want to make this point is that when the Bible gives us a promise, we see all the way along how God keeps his promise. And the Bible is usually pretty clear that the reason God did this is because he promised this to such and such a people, or such and such a person. He promised this, he promised this. And why is that? Why do I make this point? Because people want to come and say, well, Genesis 49 verse 10, when it talks about a king, kings, and lawgivers, a lawgiver wouldn't be depart from between his feet until Shiloh comes, that Shiloh is the Messiah, and that Jesus fits the king, and he does, and the lawgiver, well, he does, I guess, lawgiver, but the one who is responsible for enforcing the law is the king. The ruler is responsible for enforcing the law. The law, all the way through, is the law of Moses. That wasn't from Judah. Christ, yes, there's the law of Christ, but prophecy deals with prophesying and fulfillment. But if Shiloh is the Messiah, that means that here in Genesis 49, God's promise is set in stone, just like it was with Abraham. Once it was set with Abraham, it couldn't be from Abraham's brother or some other man. Once it was set with Isaac, it couldn't be with Ishmael. Once it was set with Jacob, it couldn't be with Esau. If it was set with Judah here in Genesis 49, it could not be Levi. Why do I say that? Let's come to Exodus chapter 32. Exodus 32. Moses is on Mount Sinai. He's been up there receiving the law and receiving the designs for the tabernacle. He's been up there 40 days and 40 nights. Israel's getting impatient. Thought he was dead. And so they built a calf. Aaron built a calf for Israel. And they said, this is the God that brought you out of Egypt. You worship it. And Moses is hearing all of the commotion down at the bottom, wondering what's going on, hear what God says. Exodus chapter 32. Tammy, do you want to get verses 7 and 8 and Bill 9 and 10?
And the Lord said to Moses, Go, get down, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made themselves a molded calf and worshipped it and sacrificed to it, and said, This is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt.
And the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and indeed it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore, let me alone, that my wrath may burn out against them, and I may consume them, and I will make of you a great nation.
Calvinist has a problem with this word, with these words when it comes to God being able to change his mind. Moses is going to plead with God, and the Calvinists and others come along and say, well, this was a test for Moses to, like, as far as the same way God tested Abraham. God knew what he was going to do, and he was just testing Moses. The problem I have with that is Genesis 22 says it was a test. Exodus 32 does not. So us just coming along and saying, well, it was a test, God really wasn't going to do it. I believe God really was going to do it. I don't believe God speaks idly. Now, he listened to Moses. Well, like I said, he relented because of the faithfulness of Moses. But when God said, I will make of you a great nation, that means that if Moses had not have pleaded with God, or if God would have said, I'm not listening to you, Moses. I have made up my mind. This is what I am going to do, and did it. If Judah was already chosen, God's promise would have broken. Moses wasn't of the tribe of Judah. Nowhere can you trace his lineage to anywhere in Judah. This is where some people try to tie knots. Well, God could have saved someone from Judah. Well, that's true. He could have done that. But, it says, I will make of you a great nation. The great nation promised to Abraham was through your seed, all the nations of the world would be blessed, and I will make of you a great nation. Well, if that promise changed to Moses, then the seed of promise would come through Moses. It's the same type of language. And so, if God didn't speak idle words here, but did relent, that tells me that Genesis 49 was not meant as a etch in stone right then that the Messiah was going to come from Judah. We never, ever, ever read in the Kings, even when there was an evil king, God having to have someone plead for the house of David. We always read that God did not destroy this house because of the promise he made to David. We always read that. Even on the worst king, Manasseh, who was the son of Hezekiah, the worst of all the kings of Judah. Ahaz was pretty close, but Manasseh takes the cake. The worst of the kings of Judah, God didn't destroy the house of David because of the promise he made. He didn't even threaten it. Not once did he do that because of that. Yet here, he does. And so, all I want to make a point is, I just don't believe Genesis 49 is meant as a messianic promise. I believe it is a promise about Judah having kings come from it, which is true, and did happen. I believe that we can look back and say, okay, that had messianic foreshadowing, perhaps. And I can agree with that. But I don't believe that up until David, when you get to 2 Samuel chapter 7, when we again see the language is very clear all the time throughout the Old Testament when God's making a messianic promise. It's very clear when he is setting a house apart for that purpose. He's very clear at making it. This is a pretty vague statement that can be interpreted many ways, and I just don't believe that's what God is doing here. However, with that, let us do come along and show, though, that Jesus was of the house of Judah. And in the end, we can argue about Genesis 49 all we want, and then in the end come to the same conclusion, that it don't make a difference, because he was from the house of Judah. And since he was from the house of Judah, we can have this disagreement on Genesis 49 and still all be Christians. Let's go to Matthew chapter 2. Henry, you want to get Matthew chapter 2, verses 4 to 6? Naomi, Hebrews chapter 7, verse 14. And Revelation chapter 5, verse 5. Matthew chapter 2, verses 4 to 6.
And when he had gathered all his chief priests and the scribes of the people together, and he inquired him where the Christ was to be born. So they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written at the prophet. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah. Out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel.
Okay. Bethlehem is the least in the tribe of Judah. But out of you will come a ruler who would shepherd the people. So, in other words, the Micah is being Micah's the prophet being quoted here in verse 5 and 6. That is Micah 5. And so Jesus would be from Judah. And read Genesis chapter 1, and you get the genealogy from Judah. Hebrews chapter 7, verse 14.
For it is evident that our Lord was descended from Judah, and in connection with that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests.
Okay. It's just in passing. Jesus was from the tribe of Judah. And the Hebrew writer is making an observation about priesthood. How Jesus is a priest, but he can't be a priest after the order of Levi, because he wasn't a Levite, he was from Judah. And if he was a priest from Judah, it must be a change of the law, because priests didn't come from Judah. They came from Levi. Revelation 5, verse 5.
But one of the elders said to me, Do not weep. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has prevailed to open the scroll and to loose its seven seals.
This is one of the passages you say, well, he's called the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Well, didn't we talk about lions and scepters and things in Genesis 49? Certainly that must mean that this refers to that. Lions are kings. All it's saying is kings come from Judah. Jesus is a king from Judah. That didn't necessarily mean just because he's a king from Judah that Genesis 49 must be talking about him. But he is a king from Judah. He's from the root of David. And the root of David we see throughout the prophets. That I don't want to deal too much about that because we're going to get to David later. But like as far as you have the root of the root of Jesse, the root of David throughout all the Old Testament. And the point is, he was going to be king. And he is king. Only difference is, he's a king, or ruler, that is greater than David and any other king. Because he is ruler over all. Hebrews chapter 5. Bill, you want to get Hebrews chapter 5, verse 9.
And having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey.
So, as king, what do we learn about the blessings that come upon those who follow him? What do we learn? What's the greatest blessing of all? Yeah. Eternal salvation is the greatest blessing that comes from the King. All who obey him. If you love me, Jesus said, you'll keep my commandments. If I keep the commandments of God, I show my love to him. And if I love God, I will keep his commandments. It's two sides of the same coin. We can't say we love God if we don't keep his commandments. Why do we keep the commandments of God? Because we love him. Like I said, it's not either or, it's both. I can't say, people say, I love God, I love God. Well, why don't you keep his commandments? Well, and they don't have an answer to that. You don't really love God if you don't keep his commandments. But when you're asking someone, well, why do you keep his commandments? Because I love him. Why do children obey their parents? Because I love my mom and dad. I love them. I want to please them. I want them to be happy with me and to want to be around me and everything goes along with that. I love them. So I do what they say. Jesus says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do the things which I say? Well, eternal salvation comes to all who obey. And as king, that is the greatest promise that he fulfilled. As far as the greatest promise he extends, because he is the ruler out of Judah. So, even though we have a little bit of a disagreement on whether Genesis 49 is a Messianic promise or a prophecy, I have no problem dealing with that Jesus was from the tribe of Judah, and that it was necessary that he be from the tribe of Judah, because we're going to get to the promise of David. And that really puts the rest of it to rest. But that Jesus is a ruler out of Judah? Absolutely. No issues with that.
I'm not ashamed to hold my Lord, nor to